Hello, welcome back to greentv.com. My series, Meet the Solutionaries, is one of my favorite things to do because these people who are in the green front lines are the most inspiring, informative, passionate people I know. My next guest, because he is literally on the world stage. He has a very lofty goal of democratizing renewable energy and bringing solar and other cleaner technologies to everyone around the world. And that may sound kind of pie in the sky, but this guy is anything but. He is grounded, feet on the ground. He's a military man. He's been in Afghanistan and Sierra Leone and all kinds of other places that don't necessarily have access to all the energy abundant resources that we do, lucky enough here in the Western world and developed world. Anthony.Frisone, or Tony, welcome to the program. You are really, truly one of, if not the most exciting guests I've had. Don't tell anyone else that. Why is that? Because you are the CEO and founder of something called CZAR Power. You are a star, but it's actually CZAR. You're going to tell us what that acronym stands for. And you have worked on something, nothing less than what I think introduced you as, trying to bring solar and renewable power to everyone in a way that is less expensive, in a way that is somehow feasible technologically. And you're smiling, you're excited. You must think this is actually something that we can achieve. This is a very timely time to be speaking to you, not only because of the latest IPCC report showing that it is truly now or never to find a way to reduce our emissions. We have something like 8 years to cut them in half. And that it really is, as Anthony Guterres of the UN said on the last report, delay is death. And it's code red for humanity, which was the first of 3 reports earlier this year, or last year, I should say. So that connected to the current situation in the Ukraine. It's hard to call it a war because it's definitely been an invasion that has in many ways kind of knocked the climate conversation off, but there's very little coverage this time. Understandable, given the enormity of this horrendous story unfolding still. And yet it also points to, just exactly why this needs to happen. This transition, massive, epic transition, needs to happen sooner than later. And I can't think of anyone who can tell us, what's possible than you, Tony. So thank you. That was probably more lead up than I needed, but it just is a reflection of my excitement about.
I think it's over. I don't know if I could say it any better. I think the interview's over. That was pretty fantastic. I really appreciate that, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing. Right, getting the word out is pretty critical to making this transition. Right, it's very important.
Absolutely. I mean, people say, well, talking isn't going to get us there. And I say, because I've been doing, green talk shows for 20 years, if we don't have a conversation first and we don't understand what the problems are and what the options are, we can't take action that's going to make the right difference. So
that's exactly right.
It starts here. So
absolutely it does.
So now that I've got you here, please start with a little bit of background about who you are. Pretty impressive. No, very impressive.
Yeah, so thank you so much. So Tony.Frisone, as you said, kind of have a little atypical background maybe for like a clean tech CEO. So I'm a shameless Midwest boy, born and raised in Ohio. I went to school in Xavier in Cincinnati, and then I went off to play Army for 8 years. So I was an engineer officer in the Army, had a phenomenal experience, went all over the world, went all over the country, met some great people, and saw some great things and some pretty horrendous things, right? And the experience in the Army is ultimately what led me to stand up Carbon Zero Advanced Research. That's where the CZAR comes from.
Thank you.
I'm a pretty terrible speller, but there's not a whole lot of acronyms that you can start with CZ. And Carbon Zero, I think is the right focus. Of course, the elimination of anything entirely, is not the real goal. But we need to start thinking about the ways that we can just do what we all want, live the way we all want, and not make it, kind of political. I think, you and I share a lot of the belief that when we're talking about climate, when we're talking about clean tech, it's been over politicized, right? So, and in my background, conservative part of the country and in a widely conservative organization in the military. The reasons that we should adopt clean energy technologies like distributed energy generation like solar or wind, and store it in, batteries and drive electric vehicles actually, could have nothing to do with CO2 or climate change at all, right? You could have a conversation with someone and prioritize it along the lines of national security, right? International security, individual security, right? And resiliency when it comes to power. There's this old word that we used to talk about a lot in the 60s and 70s called pollution. And you don't hear that term, right? A whole lot. I think you'd be hard pressed to find a whole lot of people who would argue that, sulfur or carbon monoxide is are things that we want to, get out of the air. So I think, when you couch things in a way that everyone can agree with, not just half the country, that's how we're going to get to these, pretty aggressive goals of carbon reduction and pollution reduction over the next decade or so.
So what got you on this path besides your Midwest background and a very practical mind that sees what's wrong and what could be right?
Yeah, so I think another thing that colored the experience is I'm the oldest of 10 kids, right? So when you have that perspective, you think about, I think, life a little differently, because you have, siblings and you're kind of trained to think longer term, right? And that's been pretty impactful, right? That not only like the kind of the protector mindset, but also wanting to create, a better world for your brothers and sisters, and then ultimately your children, right? So I think that mentality kind of brought me to the Army, and also the ability to pay for college, right, was a huge motivator. And while I was in the Army, I think the origin story for CZAR could really start probably in Afghanistan in 2014 when I was there doing route clearance. So that's driving really, really, really slowly down a road, looking for improvised explosive devices, ideally before they go off. And this experience was pretty formative because, here we were in a landlocked mountainous country, right? It's 120 degrees out. I'm sweating my ass off with my guys. And we're not using this giant fusion reactor in the sky for anything, right? At that time we were there for 13, 14 years. We were running mostly diesel generators to provide electricity 24/7. And then, driving around in a bunch of up-armored vehicles, which obviously are not super fuel efficient. And what I saw was, kind of the firsthand account of, waging war is a pretty fuel intensive business, right? And particularly, it's pretty central to our defense strategy to not fight home games, right? So everything is power projection, right? Going other places. And that creates kind of a nightmare logistical chain that has to be developed and maintained and secured. And when you're talking about, IED attacks in particular, the number one killer of U.S. forces and a whole bag of wars, unfortunately, over the last 20 plus years. The optimal target for IED strikes are, slow moving, unguarded convoys. And ideally, if that can be a bunch of fuel convoys, even better, right? So, I kind of saw the vicious cycle of you have troops somewhere, you need a tremendous amount of fuel to feed that beast. And because you need a tremendous amount of fuel, you need to protect those convoys with more troops. And because you have more troops, you need more fuel, right? And all of this, again, is happening in a place with a lot of solar resources, right? So, that was pretty frustrating to see. And I got back from Afghanistan. I was still on active duty, but I reconnected with a longtime buddy of mine, Nelson Wang. And Nelson is the genius, is the wizard of the team. When we reconnected,
he was getting the genius. He's the wizard. What are you?
He's no. I know. I typically hold the mantle of the dumbest person in the room. He's kind of next level brilliant.
Okay.
When I got back, he was getting his PhD at MIT, double PhD, right, in that community college known as MIT. Double PhD electrical engineering and computer engineering. And he had worked with corporations and with the DOE along this crazy futuristic thing called, electric mobility. And at the time, it's really weird to say this now, it's very weird. But like, if you ever talk to early internet pioneers, when they say, it was cool, but we weren't really sure if the internet was going to be a thing. That's exactly how it kind of was with, particularly with electric mobility, in late 2014, 2015, because no one was taking it seriously. Maybe with the exception of one kind of crazy guy that was, South African guy who started this company called Tesla that was about to go bankrupt. But don't worry about it, because that'll be a blip on the radar screen, and there, nothing's ever going to come of that organization, right? But I mean, that was the time that we lived in. I mean, that was
in 2005. They actually killed the electric car.
right.
You remember that famously. They had to do that before they could revive it. They being the big three automakers, and then of course, yes, there's the disruptors like Elon Musk and continue.
Yeah, and the other thing is, like, it's interesting to have a historical perspective. I haven't fact checked this, but a great friend of mine who's actually a retired police chief, fire chief, looking to electrify municipalities, told me that name the year and city of the first electric police vehicle, and it was 1899 in Akron, Ohio, right? So this whole thing about electrification has always kind of been in the air. When we stood up CZAR originally, people were talking that hydrogen for passenger vehicles was going to be, battery electric vehicles. To just kind of give you an idea of, where things were at, right? It was kind of crazy. And Nelson's work really, and his kind of the original idea was, hey, we think electric vehicles are going to be a thing. They take a lot of power, and how do we do this as responsibly as possible? How do we tether our transportation with our infrastructure, right? Because if we do that tethering, then we have to make sure that it's as clean as possible and as reliable as possible, right? Because you don't want to tether those things and then have the grid give out, as an example, and suck the entire transportation industry down with it, right? So he thought of very innovative ways to both reduce the risk of tapping into a grid and what happens if the grid goes down, and simultaneously making that charging process 100% renewable, right? And you can do it both, right? So this was like the original idea of CZAR was, how do we do this? It's pretty big challenge. And that, it didn't make a whole lot of like economic sense at the time, but he was getting his PhD, I was still on active duty, and we said, screw it, let's do it. Let's make a lot of bets, and a lot of dominoes had to fall in our direction. Made a lot of technology bets and political bets and cultural bets, economic bets, but they all fell in our direction, right? And that's ultimately we stood up the company around this idea. Pretty simple. Right now, you need a bunch of clean tech power electronics to unlock renewable energy, right? You need a solar inverter to make your solar work. You need a battery inverter to do anything with stationary storage. You need an electric vehicle, fast charger or charger at all to charge your electric vehicle. You need a couple more, power electronic systems to balance all of that out. And if it sounds confusing, it's because it is, right? All of the multiple different vendors, different specs. It's kind of a nightmare, right? So we're kind of looking at this, and we've done this, repeatedly over the last few years, just kind of look what the market has, and then kind of see what we're working on, making sure that it still makes sense. And it only, I think, increasingly makes sense. So the idea behind the company is pretty simple. Not that long ago, we had a separate device to make phone calls. We've now called a burner phone, a flip phone. We needed another device to take pictures, and we needed another device to go on the internet called a computer. And a few folks had the great idea of putting all of these things together, layering some software in it, and calling that a smartphone. That's exactly what we're doing with clean tech power electronics. So we're combining a lot of those things that I rattled off into one super cool magic box that can connect to solar and or wind, connect to the grid, connect to an electric vehicle, and connect to a stationary battery. And then route energy anywhere in that quadrant where it makes sense to route it.
And is this something you've invented, or is this still a work in progress?
Yeah, so great question. It is invented. It's real. It's not vaporware. We push real power through it. There is a difference between a prototype and a product, and we're almost on the product side. So we we have some phenomenal partners. Alchemy Industrial out of Houston. We just signed them on to be our manufacturer. It was very important to me, both personally and professionally, to have this made in America because we can.
And we should.
Yeah, exactly. And Alchemy's a phenomenal partner and will help us, productize the prototype and get it rocking and rolling. I think, some of the advantages of kind of doing what we're doing, first and foremost, and you hit upon this perfectly. If you care about democratizing renewable energy, it's really about increasing access. And you can't increase access to anything if you're pricing most people out of participating in the clean energy revolution, right? So for us, it's like priority number one, you have to do cost reduction. What we've been able to do by combining these separate power electronics, really bringing clean tech power electronics into the 21st century, and layering in software on top of that, we're able to reduce the cost of adoption across all of those systems by at least half, in some cases 1/4 of the cost of doing this kind of pound for pound, kilowatt for kilowatt comparison with what's out there right now. Not a 5% reduction, not a 10% reduction. We're talking about 1/2 or 1/4 of the cost that you have to do right now if you went out and tried to do it.
So how is this seemingly impossible vision possible? And what does that box look like? And how many do you need to, provide energy to a community? Like, is it something in the cloud or is it a real box? It's like, paint a picture. Because some of us are just trying to grasp what you're talking about, let alone it.
Yeah, great, all great questions. So it is a real thing. There's absolutely a place for software in this energy transition. I think we've overplayed our hand a little bit on that side, because at the end of the day, you need things to do real work. Any hardware solution, in the 21st century also incorporates software, right? Both from the control side and like the up and out, transparency and functionality aspect of it. But in our mind, a lot of the low hanging fruit was on the hardware side. Very few people want to touch hardware because it's a very different model than software as a service, right? Where it's infinitely scalable and super high margins. And for us, it was like, hey, all of that's cool and all of that is true, but like somebody needs to do real work and like build something real, because you're not going to cloud your way to a cleaner future. Like, if you want to try to convert a little drop of sunshine into usable power via the cloud, I'll wait. That sounds pretty cool, but we certainly haven't figured out how to do that. Same thing is true with charging an electric vehicle. If you can, cloud your way to that without having anything that physically does any work, more power to you. But we haven't figured out a way to do that,
so to speak. Okay. So
yeah, exactly. So this box is pretty small, right? This is, it's about 2 feet by 1.5 feet by like 6 inches. Okay. So it's pretty small. And it literally has 4 connections. One, a connection to solar or wind, one connection to the grid, and then 2 more ports that can either be an electric vehicle charging cable and a stationary battery, or 2 electric vehicle charging cables. So you can do a bunch of cool stuff, right? You can do the 2 charging cable configuration. You can do the whole V to X, vehicle to whatever, vehicle to vehicle charging, vehicle to grid, or home. There's a lot of use cases, both residential and commercial for this, but there's also a defense element to it as well, right? Being able to charge a military electric vehicle with another military electric vehicle is pretty cool, pretty flexible. And then being able to pull energy from a military electric vehicle, flip it from DC to AC and power a command and control node or aid station is also pretty cool, right? Going back to like this first point is, all of these things are phenomenal solutions that work for everybody, whether it's, commercial or residential or defense. And it's it's a hell of a time to be alive.
It's a hell of an honor to know you. I'm still just kind of trying to take all this. And what I keep picturing is our home in Austin, Texas, where the sun shines a lot and it's awfully hot. And we have our Tesla solar panels. We have our 2 Tesla cars. We have a Tesla battery charger power storage, I guess is what it is. Sure. Garage. And that's kind of a very simplified version of, I think, what you're talking about, like having a whole system that, continues to fuel itself in a clean and green way. But obviously yours is much more complex, but is that kind of a place to begin, kind of picture?
Yeah, absolutely. And in the first version of this is going to be commercial, for a variety of reasons, right? We think that we can make the most impact on the commercial side, just because that's where so much energy is going to be generated and used, right? People flipping over from internal combustion engine fleets to electric vehicle fleets. Typically commercial power usage is significantly more than anyone's individual home, right? So for us, we wanted to make the most impact. Also, was the kind of the hardest thing to do commercial, and then we can, we're planning on doing a kind of a scaled back halved version for residential. A lot of the advantages to that, when we came from this from like a charging perspective, and we talked to real customers, what we found was, look, there's like these two extremes on the charging side. On one side, you've got like the AC level 2 chargers, glorified extension cords, slow chargers. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, you've got, super cool guy, mega ultra chargers that cost, as much as a house to build and install. And for us, we were like, well, there's this whole area in the middle. And when we were having, our early customer interviews with cities and universities and businesses thinking about electrifying their fleets, what we found was they wanted something that was significantly faster, 3 times-ish faster than like a 7 kilowatt AC plug, but really weren't willing to pay for anything more than like 50 or 60 kilowatts. Sure, if you gave them 150, real, supercharger, they'd love it, but they really weren't willing to pay, 200, 250 K to have that installed, built and installed. So what we decided was, hey, we're going to focus on, rather than like split the difference between that 20 and 60, we decided, hey, we're going to make this super modular, right? So we're going to start with essentially building blocks of 20 kilowatt units. And then as your electric vehicle fleet grows, or your charging needs or energy needs change, you can just buy another module and stack them up, right? So we can, if you want to charge faster, you just buy more modules, but you can start for a very reasonable price point. And then as your fleet or energy needs change, you can expand that, right? So that was another element of what we were doing, is we wanted to, how do we have the cost while increasing efficiency, make it a heck of a lot faster to install, and a heck of a lot more flexible than the way, it's currently done right now. And that's a tall order, but we did it.
So what is your time frame, and are you trying to raise money, or do you have all the money you need? It's just you put the best minds together at MIT or wherever you're physically doing this, and it's just a matter of getting it finished. Is it time? Is it money? Is it years away? Is it months away to actually being able to use it out there in the real world?
Yeah, great question. So we've got actually a lot of high profile demonstrations, like our coming out moment. We've got one planned in Boston, in collaboration with Massachusetts state government and Mass CEC, phenomenal partners of ours, really early believers of this technology. And we wouldn't be here right now if it wasn't for some grant money we won in 2019 from them, to both to R&D grant and deployment grant, right? So really excited about that demo in Boston. It'll be at Tufts University in National Grid territory. There's another demo we've got planned in Vermont with a publicly traded solar company. We're really proud to partner with. And then we've got a few options for demonstrations in California. So probably it'll probably be LA, and a few different options there in LA. And those will be the trigger for us to, those demos will be the trigger for us to circle back with a lot of the pretty large corporations that have expressed some interest, and then essentially say, like, hey, here it is, right? Like, go charge your car, go kick the tires, it's real. Now, how many do you want, right? So that's and we anticipate that process happening probably by end of Q3, beginning of Q4. And we want to be ready to rock and roll and ship by, end of Q4 or beginning of Q1 next year.
And do you need political buy-in? I would imagine Governor Gavin Newsom would certainly be very excited about, showing this technology off in California. Or is this a separate thing because it's commercial? It's, it's private.
No, I mean, absolutely. I think, I will never say no to money, and I'll never say no to, political backing. It does take, I think, a full court press to make this happen in a kind of a realistic, time horizon. Ultimately, our money's on, these will be the solutions that everyone adopts, regardless of, political persuasion or where you're at in the country, because it will, have less to do with ideology and more to do with like dollars and cents, right? Like if this is the better, safer, more reliable, more resilient, cheaper way to do X, it'll get adopted, right? Now that doesn't mean the states and the politicians that have really swung for the fences early on don't matter, right? Because they absolutely do. A lot of the things that California and Massachusetts have passed, relating to, hey, we're going to set goals for not only sustainable energy generation but for our transportation. When California says, thou shalt not sell an internal combustion engine vehicle in the largest state in the country, all of the auto manufacturers, start taking notes, right? So like those early pioneers are very important to this process. But I think ultimately it won't be a California and Massachusetts coastal thing, right? It'll just be the solution that everyone across all America adopts.
So are people thrilled about this, excited, trying to help you? Because we need it yesterday, and nothing like a war they're always connected to oil.
Sure.
Certainly it's, bringing the question to fore, like what is the cost of our addiction to oil when, countries like Germany can't, cut off Russia because they might lose their supply of oil. I mean, it's right in our faces right now, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. The conflict in Ukraine is, I think, pretty eye-opening to a lot of folks for a lot of different reasons. But I think a lot of people are like missing the point, right? Even to the almost, some folks that I've had some discussions with, almost do like this weird victim blaming thing with Ukraine. Like, well, they shouldn't have asked to join NATO. And kind of like they were asking for it. Look, the geopolitical situation for our country and the world means a lot to me, right? So when you actually peel the onion back on an argument like that, I got to think, like, last time I checked, Estonia and Latvia bordered Russia and our NATO countries. So it's not like, oh, Russia was going to invade any country in NATO that borders it, right? Like that. What's the real reason? And those of us that kind of follow the conflict very closely and work in this space, I mean, it comes down to energy, right? Natural gas and oil that is both produced in Ukraine and flows through Ukraine, and ensuring that is dominated by Russia for decades to come is the reason, right? Is the whole point of securing this. Of course, there are multiple motivations for what Putin did in Ukraine, but energy is like, I think anyone who studies this topic, energy is like the number one real reason. You can couch it in nationalism, you can couch it in NATO stuff. It's like, okay, sure, but like what is the reason you don't? It's to secure that the pipeline access and to dominate that entire country, right? So look, and we also have to be real. This the Ukrainian defense, I think, shocked almost all of us, right? I mean, unbelievable leadership. I mean, you talk about leadership, you talk about a presidential leadership. My God. And I think that, if you compare and contrast what happened in Afghanistan with what's happening in Ukraine, right, it's night and day. And it really does take one person to not flee and say, look, I'm not running, to turn the entire country around and follow him, and then turn the entire world around that country, right? But we shouldn't have ever been in this point, because the reliance on Russian oil and natural gas enabled the boldness. I mean, this is 2022.
Yeah.
Like this is not 1922. A country invades, two European countries like that. Like, what is going on? It's because ultimately Putin. I think Putin thought that no one would do anything because he had the country. A lot of the NATO countries, with energy
over a barrel. I mean, really
over a barrel. Yeah. So there's obviously, I mean, tremendous, human cost, unfortunately, to this, right? Human rights violations, a lot of, allegations of genocide. Even if those things weren't the case, like, my God, you had a country invade another sovereign nation for no good reason, right?
And there are two countries that, like, they're related. The Russian soldiers have relatives that they're killing in the Ukraine.
Absolutely.
It's mind-boggling, really.
Yeah, and I think it's highlighting the need for countries to be energy independent, right? Because I think we could have avoided this conflict from ever happening if their leverage was not there to shut off, the natural gas pipeline and oil pipelines.
Right. So let me go back. I want to go back to Afghanistan for a minute,
Sure.
but also have another question about Ukraine. Should we have been in Afghanistan in the first place? And you spent time there, and were you surprised when we pulled out and, there was not a fight, the opposite of what's going on in Ukraine? Or did you expect it, given your, very much an insider point of view?
Yeah, so I think the way Afghanistan was handled initially made a lot of sense, right? You had a haven for a terrorist organization, the Taliban, at the time, the government of Afghanistan, harboring Al-Qaeda. And the Bush administration asked, them to turn over the members of Al-Qaeda, gave them that opportunity. The Taliban said no. And the way that we went in, relatively speaking, light footprint, led by the Central Intelligence Agency and, largely special operations. We invaded in October, the Taliban fell, later that year, right? So, that was pretty fast. We took our eye off the ball. Unfortunately, I think with the invasion of Iraq in 2003, is responsible for that, right? And then I think the lion's share of emphasis was on that mess for years, and we allowed Afghanistan to fester and the Taliban to regain strength, and kind of set the conditions for 20 years of mayhem in that country. It's a beautiful country, right? It's an amazing country with amazing people. When I was there, our interpreter Assad and his family, I mean, this is a guy who has supported U.S. forces since the invasion. He has had family members killed by the Taliban because he helped U.S. forces, being a translator. And while I was about to go home, he was promised citizenship in the United States. Never turned out, right? And I kind of went berserk. Wrote congressmen and State Department to be like, hey, look, this is as messed up as it gets. You got to bring him and his family over here. Like, this is ridiculous. So I don't know if it was me kind of screaming and sending strongly worded emails to people or not, but coincidentally, a couple months later, he gets the green light, and him and his family moved to the United States, moved to Jacksonville. So I think like that difference, what separates like my situation, that situation with a lot of my friends is, a lot of those interpreters and their families did not get out, right? So that caused, I think, a tremendous amount of pain to know that, people that you've worked with, not only once, but sometimes multiple times, multiple deployments, they're stuck there, right? And their future is pretty terrible.
And right now, I mean, I'm tempted to ask you, given your, intelligent sources there, what's it like? I mean, since we left?
I mean, it's a complete disaster. People are starving to death. It's completely cut off. I think what not enough people understand is it's a hell of a lot easier to blow up trains than to get them to run on time, right? So like you can play the spoiler for 20 years, like bravo. Can you run a country? No, not really. Right. And we saw the same thing with ISIS, right? It's like, it's really cool to beat your chest, and then to do a shock and awe campaign, and then, set up a little, hovel of terror. But that's not ruling, right? Like you're not going to create a civilization that way. And I think we're seeing this kind of on full display in Afghanistan, unfortunately, right now.
And one of the things I remember in our first conversation, you talked about, here in Afghanistan, it's hot, the sun beats down. A lot of these, these military people were getting killed, ours, because they were, in convoys bringing fuel to fuel the equipment. Sorry, I don't have all the war technology down, but you notice, gee, there's the sun, we're getting killed because we're trying to transport gasoline to fuel this fight. And was that kind of a eureka moment for you, a light bulb or something like that, where, wait a minute, what's wrong with this picture? How can we use that resource up there? Would you call it that giant ball of fusion?
Yeah, fusion reactor in the sky.
Yeah, to make something work better here, or some things work better there.
Yeah, absolutely. Not only that, but to kind of highlight how big of a nerd I actually am, before we went over there, I did a lot of U.S. Geological Survey, read a lot of U.S. Geological Survey studies on Afghanistan, and just what a tremendous mineral resource Afghanistan is, right? A lot of lithium, right? So, yeah, so we've got, here we are at this situation where if a few folks can, think about this a little bit more intelligently, could have been a phenomenal place. And it was, in recent memory, it was an awesome place, right? It was a pretty, westernized, place to live for a while. And they're good people there. They're really good people. And it's sad to see. But it's also not over, right? It's an unfortunate chapter, and it's really difficult and painful for a lot of us to watch. But the story is not written on Afghanistan right now, right? There's a lot of overly simplistic narratives about Afghanistan that are wrong.
Okay.
Right. So, last thing I'll say on it is that the country has a lot of things going for it. Phenomenal, mineral wealth being one of them, and the kind of the position of the country is also pretty strategic for a lot of different reasons. I would never have left Afghanistan. There's a difference between, surging and waging full combat operations and then having no real presence there. To me, again, this is kind of ridiculous extremes. It is I think it's the most strategic piece of real estate in the world, right? It borders China, borders Pakistan, borders Iran, pretty close to Russia, maybe a pretty good spot to camp out. And we were able to keep the devil down in the hole with a, kind of one hand tied behind our back, right? A very few amount of forces actually there to keep a lid on the country for 20 years.
Okay, so now back to Ukraine, which is, as we speak, being destroyed, parts of it. And you see, what's left behind in Mariupol and other parts where they've really just killed hundreds, if not thousands of people, which is beyond tragic and hard to even fathom. And yet you look at just the infrastructure, you look at these buildings just destroyed, tall apartment buildings. And, I can't even imagine who's going to rebuild that. Who's going to pay for that? How is that going to happen? When is it going to happen? So just beyond the human cost, the infrastructure, the property, it's just devastating, clearly. What do you think is going to happen? Do you have any, it's hard to predict how Putin is going to be, but do you see any exit strategy that's likely? And then what does happen in these situations where, the occupiers leave and hell is left behind?
Sure. Yeah. Again, phenomenal questions. I think this might be a little controversial, but I think it's important to remember you have to leave someone kind of a golden bridge to retreat, right? So there has to be an off ramp to save face for Putin, right? Because if you truly shut everything down and completely isolate him and the entire country, there's no reason to stop, right? So as ideologically painful as it sounds, there has to be an exit ramp that is acceptable to him to de-escalate everything and to get to the peace talks, sooner rather than later.
Are we getting any closer to that? And with the nuclear weapon, possibility, I don't know if you have any sense of how likely that could be, that if he was pushed, even further into a corner, he might actually use that. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think like that is such an extreme outcome that I think I'd hope, but I also believe that we're not there yet, right? The very interesting kind of analysis of the entire conflict in the invasion was well, one, Putin thought that the country would roll over, similar to Afghanistan. Two, we're kind of, and this is a little bit of vindication for those of us currently or formerly in the military, is like the world's now seeing that war's pretty hard to do, right? Like when you look at like the disasters in Iraq and Afghanistan, it's like Russia, who I think any sane person would think is the second or third most powerful, probably second most powerful military in the world. They couldn't even successfully invade a neighbor, right? So you talk about power projection. Where we're at as a country, and then where number two is at, is a rather dramatic drop, right? And there's a lot of reasons for that, right? Like rail-based, logistics is not a priority. The Russian way of war, and this is something to kind of keep in mind, is the Russian way of war is a fires-based military. So a lot of artillery. Some of the thing that I'm keeping a pretty close eye on is, and you said it perfectly, they really view Ukraine as Russia, right? So unlike kind of what we saw with their operations in Chechnya, they kind of went in pretty light, or like the idea was light, both because they thought the Ukrainians would roll over, and because they view Ukrainians as Russians. So you saw a lot of use of like precision guided munitions, which is not a typical Russian way of war, right? That accounts for a pretty small percentage of their overall stockpile, and they've burned through most of those, right? So it's like here we're going to be at an inflection point where it's going to be massive, unguided, dumb, bombs and artillery and rockets, because they've simply depleted or are about to deplete their precision munitions. Also, they're getting embarrassed, and they're losing ground in some places, right? So, obviously it's a terrible situation, but it's also there's a lot of silver lining to this, right? Like look at the leadership that's being demonstrated in Ukraine. Look at the fighting spirit of the Ukrainian people, right? Men and women of all ages, of all backgrounds, of all political persuasions, are fighting an invader, right? And that's pretty inspiring. You asked the question about rebuilding. I would be, given the amount of military aid that we're seeing coming from typically countries in Western European countries that don't give aid, I would be shocked and appalled and very surprised if there wasn't even more significant aid in terms of dollars and resources that go to Ukraine after the conflict to rebuild, right? So long as that territory is under a Ukrainian flag and not a Russian flag.
Is it too soon and or idealistic to envision a green renaissance happening with rebuilding and new energy grids? Because it really looks like they're going to almost have to start from scratch in some places.
Yeah, I think that again is another opportunity, another silver lining to this, right? Anytime something is destroyed, you have the opportunity to kind of rethink and build something new. And I think when you're talking about, nothing pushes a spirit of independence and resiliency and personal security like having to live through a war or conflict or privation, right? So I would be surprised also if we did not see in that rebuilding process a lot more incorporation of modern buildings and the opportunity to create more decentralized energy generation and storage to again inject more resiliency into the overall country.
And might another silver green lining be, it has to be, right, that the world sees, right in front of our face, can't avoid it, the cost of our addiction to oil and the need to get off it, which we keep hearing, got to get off oil, got to get off oil. Your project may be the first thing I've seen that actually is one of the key ways we could start to do that. And I just wonder if you think that's realistic, that this is really going to change the game in terms of global focus, has it already started? We know the costs of, like, first of all, this is just, the war has knocked climate change off, it was never really high up on the, news media agenda. It was starting to get there a little bit, not enough, but now it's just like, can't think of it, especially with COVID. And in meantime, as we just heard from the IPCC scientists, it's dire. We don't have any time to waste. Does that keep you up at night like it does me? And then just there's the, like you say, burning stuff, which is what war is, just all the pollution. And I just did an interview with a filmmaker who did a documentary after the Iraq War with her late husband, all about the environmental impacts of war and water contamination and just the pollution that lasts. And it just, like in 2022, the fact that things are being, knowingly destroyed, blown up, people are dying, worst of all, people are injured, and then people are going to be sickened by, the aftermath, especially coming out of a pandemic where, if nothing else, I hope we learned the preciousness of life and health, and that it's a small world. And to me, does it blow your mind as much as it does me that we're here now? And anyway, that's my question to you. That is a big question, I know.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the world's a pretty complicated place, and there's a lot of entrenched interests and differences of opinions and motivations. And that's kind of what makes life both frustrating and fun to live. I think as it relates to this, again, there's a lot of false narratives or at least intellectually lazy counterpoints to the situation in Ukraine. One of them is, well, if Europe would have just kept their nuclear power plants open, none of this would have happened, right? And it's like, that certainly would have helped the problem when we're specifically talking about increasing the amount of Russian oil and natural gas, right? But look, solar is the cheapest way to generate energy, period. Right? So it's like, it's not a pipe dream. It's not, oh, we got to rely on a bunch of subsidies. It's not like, this is a thing. It's a fact. I'm sorry if you don't like it, but like, that's the reality. So there needs to be far more emphasis on deploying the solutions that we have, rather than kind of waiting for Superman, or
wait, aren't you Superman?
Yeah, no, maybe Captain America, but not Superman. I think we need to deploy the solutions that we have, in kind of set up that situation where there's a lot of cool technology that we can test really fast and iterate on and deploy as well. So let's stop talking about like grand goals in 15 years. Let's start deploying the stuff that we have, right? Because we can do that now. It's the cheapest now. It's not the cheapest in 5 years. It's the cheapest now. It's like, let's pull the trigger. Like, let's start doing these things, and that'll, like, I think, take us to a safer, more sustainable, and smarter future, sooner rather than later, right? Because I don't get super upset or a lot of anxiety, because I would be if the solutions weren't there. Right? If this was 10 or 20 years ago, I would be a lot more concerned, right? But I sleep pretty soundly at night, because if someone wants to do it, they can right now. And that type of empowerment is important, but it takes folks like us to get the word out, to right people in power who are making decisions, ourselves being one of them, right? Like, we make decisions for our energy every single day. And then, the people in power and government, make sure that they understand, the cost of not acting.
You are fascinating. I really could go on with more questions that I know you have time to answer. I don't want you to take time to answer. I want you to get back to work. And my last question, only because it has to be, would love to have you back on, and maybe get you be a more regular part of Green TV, because you are the solutionary. We may have a vote for the Eco Solutionary of the Year, and I'm quite sure so far you would win that award. What would you like people to do? You just talked about we can't just talk or wait or wish. If people are excited about your vision, is there a way they can get involved, support you, spread the word, give money? Because yes, I vote for your, I want more of what you're saying.
Yeah, so I think the first way is to talk, right? Is to have more kind of communication and collaboration. Yeah. Because we don't have it all figured out. It's a really exciting time because no one has it figured out, right? And there's an opportunity here for the small guys, the pirates, to kind of make a quantum leap. and really take control over this energy transition. So I'm on LinkedIn, Tony.Frisone, F-R-I-S-O-N-E. Drop me a line on LinkedIn. You can email me at Anthony.Frisone at CZAR, C-Z-A-R, hyphen power, POWER.com is my direct email. And, looking forward to talking and collaborating and kind of sharing ideas and getting this off the ground.
Wonderful. I love how you saw a need and filled it. And I like to think of Green TV as kind of a media disruptor, could not get the news networks to focus on environmental news. And for whatever reason, they've resisted all the way up till now. They cover a few stories and they mention it a lot more than they used to, but it's not the same as offering programming on Solutions. So that's why we started Green TV. Like, you can't wait for them to do it. We're not getting any further along. The planet's not getting any cooler. I'm not getting any younger. Let's do it. Let's just see what happens, because it's all about need. And you have definitely given us reason for hope about the need to make this transition faster than anyone could even imagine. And thank you for your imagination, very, very much educated vision, and your people that you're working with, just, they know that they're onto something, but give them our excitement, our support, and you can have our word here at Green TV that we will continue to talk about it, have you back, and anybody who you think is, going to benefit our viewers in terms of their visions, please bring them on, because the key thing is hope. So many people have just kind of given up on climate change. And it's like, wait a minute, do you have kids? Do you have grandkids? Was there a memo that I missed that said we're just giving up? And people like you and projects like yours, especially because they're pretty far along, give us hope and give us excitement. And that's exactly why we're here, to amplify these solutions and to scale them up and to encourage other people to, we need the best and the brightest, and you are that. So thank you so much, Tony.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Good luck. We'll be in touch and want to keep up with CZAR, C-Z-A-R. Check it out.
Thank you.
That does it for this edition of Green TV. You have met a solutionary, I think perhaps one of the best out there that I've met so far. Very happy to bring you this conversation. If you've enjoyed it, please go to YouTube and subscribe to greentv.com. The more subscribers we get, the sooner we can bring you live streaming, which will bring us a lot more content, bring you a lot more content, which we're very eager to do. There's no shortage of things to talk about, challenges, but solutions most important. And we are dedicated to bringing them to you. Just please spread the word. We want to be one-stop shopping for everything you need to know about what's going on with our weather, with our world, and most important, what can be done? What can you do? Hope you've learned something. I have. See you next time.